Mostly confused about what I live in. The only way I probably am. One thing that still gets me. Or did I become a ghost? Welcome. Welcome. So this video is going to be books that I recommend people to get into classics, but even more than that, really just to get into reading itself. Because it wasn't sitting right with me that I ride for reading so much, and I think it's so mandatory to life, and just, I think it's something everyone should do, but I have no video on my account that's dedicated to recommendations, so I had to fix that. Don't know how many are in here. It's a good amount. It's definitely over 20. I'll probably tally it up and put it at the end of the video somewhere, or the title. Don't know what I'm talking about. And it's definitely a mix of between, I think these are all stuff beginners can pick up instantly, but some of them are more complicated than others. Some are more just more approachable. And in addition to me saying I'm not the best, most well-versed reader, all of you guys are that watch me. You guys know every single book. So with that being said, if there's any books in here that I have not talked about that you think are good for beginners, please put them in the comments. Like, that's basically what I want this video to be. I just want it to be recommendations, and they can get it from me or anybody else that's read anything. And stay tuned for the very end. The very last book I do in this video will be the most recommended book that I have for anybody. But that's enough talking. Let's get into the actual video. Love you for watching. So the very first books I want to talk about for this video are going to be the books you get in high school. Yes, the ones that you cram read on a Thursday night at 11 p.m. for the test on Friday. The one that you swear after you finish you never think about. Those are the books I'm talking about right now. Whether that's 1984, Animal Farm, Catcher in the Rye, Lord of the Flies, The Crucible, Friend 451. Any of the books that you get in high school, I think they're all curriculum for a reason and are picked for a reason. The first one I want to talk about is Friend 451, and this is probably the one I recommend the most out of all high school books, at least the ones that I read. It is to this day one of my favorite books of all time, and I revisited it probably about maybe 2 months ago, and there was the themes in it were just so glaringly obvious, and I don't know how I didn't pick it up even when I was younger. And I understand there's like the age gap there, maybe like a 6-year age gap to where I just wasn't thinking that much or that critical about anything in life. But I feel like once you get past a certain age and you see what the world really is, even though I'm still young, I'm like 22, but even though I'm still young and very naive when it comes to the world, I've seen enough to where I can decipher what these themes are and how they can affect my real life. Like themes of individuality, commercialism, censorship, what the role of the government is in accordance to you. Like, there's so many things you can pull from this book that are very prominent today when you look outside. And the whole gist of this book is that the main character's name is Montague, and he's a firefighter. But in this dystopian society, firefighters burn books instead of put out fires. So he's aiding the censorship of the citizens. And then due to a little girl named Clarice, she opens his eyes to what's really going on, and he sees it differently. And it shows how he rebels against the society. Masterclass stuff, and you probably read it in high school, but I recommend you reading it again because I promise you there's so much more into it that you didn't get when you were 15, 16. And I also didn't want to make this video too long when it came to summaries and all kind of stuff like that. So I'm only going to touch on this book in its totality when it comes to summary. But I do want to mention some stuff about these other books. Like Lord of the Flies of William Golding is amazing when it comes to like showing hierarchy and showing the innate ability of humans to just go on power trips when it comes to when you see yourself over somebody, what that would do to you. Catcher in the Rye is probably, I read this recently. I didn't read it in high school, but I know it's a high school book for people more up north, I'm pretty sure. But it's so good because my favorite book of all time is The Bell Jar, which is probably also in here, spoiler. But the contrast between Holden and Esther Greenwood are so glaringly obvious, and I really enjoyed how it was just like, they both have this looming noir kind of bleak feeling about life, and it's like a male and female split of how they deal with it. Like, there's just a whole bunch of stuff in it. I want to make a whole video on that soon. 1984 Animal Farm are probably some of the best commentaries on like governmental censorship, power, just a kind of oppression itself and really what it is. And 1984 is probably the best, epitome of that. I mean, Big Brother is literally going on right now. And the Animal Farm was like my first introduction in literature itself to symbolism and what stuff really meant. Because even in high school, I had a good English teacher, and she was telling us how this is, like Napoleon is supposed to be like Stalin, and it's like showing this is how Russia took over, and it was so cool to see that because I was always a history guy. So I was reading and I was like, yo, I'm seeing the parallels, and I'm seeing the lines crossed, like, it was so good. Highly recommend all of these books. Like, they're just all so good, and they wouldn't be curriculum just for no reason. Like, there's a reason why they were meticulously picked for students trying to get into literature. Absolute masterclasses. Definitely go reread these. The next book I want to talk about is not really a book, it's a certain poem in this, but it's The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, you would think this is more difficult than it is due to its the word choice. Obviously, it's Old English still, Gothic. Like, I understand approaching it may seem a little hard. His poetry is, to me, is just so approachable for some reason. Like, recently, Poe became one of my favorite writers of all time. I probably, about a week ago at this point, I sat in my bed and read Telltale Heart, Black Cat, Into the Maelstrom, The Raven, like a lot of his more popular works, House of the Fall of the Usher, all this stuff. And I see why people love him so much. He's so like beloved in a certain literary space because of his glooming, dark kind of aspect. And that's all I like. I love sad, dark media. To me, it's the most emotionally driven. But not to get off too far on a tangent. The Raven itself, this may sound crazy. I don't know if this is a hot take. I know it's really popular. But I think that is the best piece of literature of all time. Like, outside of, like, I don't think my favorite book of all time. I love The Bell Jar the most. Book of Disquiet, Pessoa. But The Raven, like, when I was reading it, I was like, yo, this cannot be. This is, like, otherworldly. A human couldn't have wrote this. Whenever I read poetry, obviously, I'm not some superhuman. Like, everyone does this. But, like, I start to feel, like, the flow of how they wanted it to be read. Because, for one, I listen to a lot of music, absurd amounts of music. Like, I want to make a whole video on that itself, too. But I've also produced beats before. I've tried to play instruments. And, like, I'm good with BPM. So whenever I'm, like, reading poetry, like, I can, like, it sounds crazy, but I can hear the tone in my head. And The Raven, to me, was like, oh my gosh, dude. But The Raven is just, like, it's literally a masterclass when it comes to tonality. How it was written was like, yo, amazing. And we haven't even gotten into what it's about. Basically, it's about a man that lost his lost love. Her name is Lenore. And depending on how you see the poem, it's either you think it's in the mind or you think it's actual physically happening. But a raven flies into his window and it perches upon his dresser on a statue of Athena. And it's like a whole psychological feel of denial, isolation, what being isolated after a tragic event could do to you, like all kind of crazy stuff like that. And I don't want to get too far into it because there's so many ways you could outlook the poem. So I don't want to give you mine and you read it and you try and find what I say in the poem. I want you to find it for yourself. But you can read it in literally less than 15 minutes. So what I want you to do, pause the video right now, read The Raven, and then comment about it, please. I want to talk about it with somebody. I talk about it with people in my real life, but like, they're not as in depth. Like, I need someone to have like a whole hour-long FaceTime with me about it. Like, it's that good. I'm thinking about getting Nevermore tatted somewhere. I might get it like up here or something. When you read The Raven, you'll know why I say that. Okay, let me pick a good one for next. Next one, Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So I just did an hour-long review on this book. It's my last video, go watch that. But this is the very first book that I picked up when I got into reading about 6 months ago. And it's just, oh my gosh. So essentially the book's about a man named Dorian, young aristocrat, he can do no wrong in society. And then something someone tells him changes his whole outlook, and that was that your youth is all that matters in life. He hears that and it completely skews his worldview to the point where he sees a painting and he doesn't think of how beautiful the painting is. His mind instantly goes to, I look beautiful in this painting and it'll never grow old and I will. I know, insane turn of events. So he literally makes a deal with the universe and says, I don't want any of my sins to reflect on me, or I don't want to age, nothing like that. Let it all go to the painting. The universe grants him with this, and then all his sins and moral unjust, anything he does bad will reflect on the painting and not him. So it shows how that can get to his head, and he starts doing all these terrible things that don't reflect on him. And since he's so enveloped in society of people telling all this good, that's all he cares about, he starts to really feel like the bad he's doing isn't bad because no one's telling me it's bad. It just shows the implications of being vain, losing your purity so young, how your locus of control can affect how you think. So many crazy themes in this book. And if you're familiar with Greek mythology, it's oddly reminiscent of the myth of Narcissus. But I get into more of that in the video, so go watch that hour-long. That's actually crazy. I did an hour-long review on the book. That's so crazy. Great book, you'll love it. All right, next book. I want to get this out of the way early. My favorite book of all time, ever, is The Bell Jar. So once again, I am huge on sad media. I just think it's the most emotionally packed. It's so beautiful to me reading stuff like that because I know what it takes to go through that and then make something out of it. And The Bell Jar to me is the epitome of this. This is the absolute pinnacle of what depression and psychosis can be in art form. And basically it follows Esther Greenwood, who is going through psychosis. And basically the entire book is about her not wanting to be alive. And she's trying to show people that she is not okay. And no one's giving her the time of day of what she truly needs. And like, it just, For me, it was a commentary on what we should do to help people like that, what that truly feels like, because once again, we're in the mind of Esther. There's just so much going on. Like, it's very haunting. It's a very gloomy book. I only recommend this to you if that sounds interesting and you want to see what that could feel like, because it's so palpable to me that it was like, I wouldn't read it if I was like really on the brink. Like, it's definitely a trigger warning. And to me, why I love the book so much is that it's almost like semi-autobiographical, to the point where Sylvia, we all know what happened to Sylvia. If you don't, she had committed suicide. She passed away. And she passed away 6 months after this book released, I'm pretty sure. So she never got to see how impactful this book was. But I say all that to say, she was going through so much in depression and psychosis, and how tragic her life was. She was just a very tortured soul. But why that's so interesting is that I read her journals, and she said that she didn't want to give the depression she was feeling enough power over her to where it would consume her. So she never gave it a name, and she never spoke about the depression as if it was happening to her. She would always say it was like some distant thing, even though it was very obviously affecting her. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's clear that Esther is Sylvia, but she didn't want to give the depression enough power to consume her, and she spoke about it as if it was happening to someone else. But it's very clear that the book itself, the plot, what's going on, is how she was feeling. Every time it said what Esther was talking about, that's how Sylvia felt. It was so very obvious, especially after reading like her poems too, Lady Lazarus, reading Daddy, reading Ariel. Like, just, it was all Sylvia's stuff connects, because she only talked about a few topics, but I absolutely love her for it. Peak book, favorite book of all time. I recommend it. It's also not a hard read, literary wise. Like, you'll read it very easily, very approachable. I would just say there's trigger warnings for it's very dark, very sad, very gloomy. If you don't like putting yourself into that perspective, don't read it. But if that's interesting to you and you find some value in seeing perspectives like that, please read it and please talk to me about it. Next book, Stoner, John Williams. So this book is about a man named William Stoner, and seemingly it's a very boring book. You would think it's very mundane, very rudimentary when it comes to plot. And I thought that too. When people first started telling me about the book, they were just saying it's about a very quiet life, a man that falls in love with literature, and he just doesn't do much in the book. And I was like, then why would I read it? But then I picked it up because people just kept telling me to read it, and I was like, yo, there's something in here that I'm not getting. Let me try and go find it. And what I got from the book was this almost like complex way of seeing a mundane life. Like, it's a very quiet life he lives. He falls in love with literature. He goes to school for it. He finds his wife. He has a daughter. He retires from his job. Like, it's a very calm life. But what this book really made me highlight was the feeling of Sonder, which is everyone's living a life just as complex as yours. So even though he was living a quiet life, we're in the mind of William Stoner, to the point where even that this seemingly boring life of loving literature, it's very complex in how it was told, because human emotions are complex. And I got to applaud John Williams for how he wrote that, because every emotion, he really like tried to chisel it and really like scope something. And he's definitely more of an abstract writer. He's one of those that will sacrifice words, sacrifice sentences for the betterment of the whole book. He's much more of a painter when it comes to the writing style. But if that sounds interesting to you, I definitely recommend you reading it, because you'll definitely see life differently, and you'll see that all the mundane, quiet aspects of life, even though they might seem mundane to you, they might seem bleak to you, it's still so complex, because humans are complex and we don't truly know any emotion. So the fact that we're feeling certain things and we think it's boring, if you can look at it in a way of like, what am I really feeling right now? You'll start seeing it as, you'll start giving more value to every emotion you have. Like, I got so much from this book. I think everyone should read it. It's one of those I think it's a mandatory read. Next book, another one of my favorite books of all time, Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, but 1818 text. I have not read the 18, I don't know what the more modern one is, but I know this is the first one she wrote. Another one of those that's in the realm of more sad, dark, kind of gloomy books. But the themes in this book are so approachable, and I think for one, it's written well. It's very easy to get into. At least 1818 was. I say that reluctantly, because there is some times where it's a little bit harder. It's one of the older books, but to me it was very easy for me to get into it. So I think I'm no one special. So if I can do it, you definitely can. But the reason why I recommend it so much for beginners is because what you think you know about Frankenstein, you don't actually know. When I first got into it, I thought Frankenstein was the monster. I thought it was going to be almost like satirical or goofy, kind of like he would just walk around like this, how we see Frankenstein, how he is now. And it was nothing like that at all. It was probably the best commentary I've seen on alienation. Second best, maybe, behind another book that's also in here. But basically, the gist of the book is that Dr. Frankenstein makes a monster, sees that he basically shuns the monster and dismisses it. And then we follow the monster. We're in the psyche of someone that he didn't ask to be here, and he's getting dismissed from like his creator, and he's like, what did I do? And that whole like palpable feeling of confusion to me was so like real. I was reading it and it felt like I was the monster. Like, it was written that well. It's that good when I was reading it. Like, there's a vast difference between alienation and isolation. Isolation is more self. You do it yourself. I'm isolating from this. But alienation, to me, is much darker because it's society alienating you. Like, it's like society is shunning you. People are shunning you. And the monster didn't ask to be here. And his first interaction with a human is being shunned by his creator. It's just so good. There's so much themes in here, or so many themes in here. And I want to make a whole video on it. So I gave you a good amount of the summary of that's the gist of the book. But there's way more. I got to get into those books. So this might be the next review. This and the Bell Jar. Alright, next book I got here. This is a short story book of Kafka, and the one that's in here is the Burrow. So basically, the gist of this one is that it's like a creature that he like makes these burrows to hide from imaginary threats. And to me, the theme of it was paranoia and what that can really feel like in whenever you're inside of it, and when you're really reveling in that feeling. And Kafka to me is like, he's probably, well, you guys can't see it, but I have a Kafka tattoo right here. It's a portrait. I absolutely love Kafka, especially how he writes and what he tries to come across from when it comes to portraying things. Because I have 2 more Kafka short stories in this video, but they're not in this book. Well, they're in this book, but I read them out of the other book. But I wanted to add in the Burrow just because it's one that's less known. You know about Metamorphosis, you know about Penal Colony, you've heard about these, but the Burrow's one that no one really talks about. I don't know why. I think it's the shortest out of the 3. And it's one you could pick up right now. It's probably one of the most approachable ones he has. Metamorphosis is kind of harder, so is Penal Colony, but Burrow is much easier to read to me. I think you really enjoyed it. It's very short. Pick this up. This one I got here is Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So what Tao Te Ching is, it's more of like excerpts. Not really excerpts. That means of something. It's like small passages. It's almost like poetry. It's poetry that doesn't rhyme. There's definitely a word for that. I just don't know it. And the reason why I recommend this to beginners is because it's not about reading classics or reading any genre really. It's just reading itself. And if you read anything, you'll want to read more. In all the Eastern literature, if it's Ilych, Book of 5 Rings, even like Tibetan Book of the Dead, even like all the Eastern literature is so peaceful in the way they write. It's almost like a controlled whimsicality when it comes to what they're writing. It's just so beautiful. And I'm actually going to show you guys how it's written. Is like this. It's excerpts. It's almost like poetry, and it's not really a novel. But when you read this, you can probably find a PDF online. If not, you can find it at your local bookstore because it's always there whenever I go. But it's some of the most peaceful stuff you'll read outside of a religious text at all. Even though it kind of is. I'm pretty sure it's a religious text for Taoism, so that kind of makes sense. But outside of the main like religious text that you get like spiritually like reading from your religion, like I'm a devout Christian, but I read a lot of Eastern Buddhist texts just because to me it's so tranquil. It's so like serene. I just really enjoy reading stuff like this because it's very peaceful. I love it. And my whole philosophy is if you read something, you'll want to read more. It's not about reading classics or reading any genre. It's about reading itself, and you'll want to read more. So I got to add in Tao Te Ching. I read it early on in my reading journey, and I absolutely loved it. Next book, Death, Alive, and Ilych by Tolstoy. This might be one of the harder books to read on this video. I really enjoyed it, though. I didn't read it when I was a beginner. I'm still a beginner now. It's only been like 6-7 months, but I read it probably like 4 months in. And I only read it because I've always been fascinated with death itself. Not really afterlife because I'm Christian. I know where I'll be when I die. But it's really just what death itself is. The concept of death, the actual, what does that feel like in the moment? Not really for you, but everyone else around you. Like that whole brooding feeling. I've always been fascinated with that for some reason. I don't know why. I have a scythe tattoo right here. You guys can't see it, but it's for that. All that to say, Death, Alive, and Ilych, it made me think about it a lot, and it kind of made me reflect on what death really is, and much more about how people around me will be affected by it. Basically, the whole story is about someone he has like a lot of superficial success, and he has a lot of these like material things, but once he gets gravely ill, he has to really reflect on nothing really mattering at all, and like all that stuff he had doesn't really matter. People around him start seeing him differently. Like there's so much that goes into what death really is, and it's much more of I think death is much more of a state of existence than an actual physical thing. And this book really highlighted that for me. I've always thought that, but this book definitely made me reflect on it some more. You'll really like it though. It's definitely one of the harder reads because Tolstoy, even though Tolstoy is much more of a painter as well. He's not like a Kafka or Morrison when it comes to writing style, but I just like how he writes, and I think a beginner could get into it. But I don't know. This is maybe like it's one of the harder ones. Really enjoy it though. You'll love it too. Next book, Candide, Voltaire. So Voltaire is an Enlightenment writer, so you would think it's a hard read. It's really not at all. And basically what it's about is that it's about a young boy named Candide, and he goes out to the world really wide-eyed, and he's like, what is this? And then someone tells him the world's all butterflies, rainbows, and sunshine, and he starts seeing that it's not. And basically it's really about how he deals with that realization. And the reason why that's so cool to me is because I believe there's inherent wrongs in the world that we have to learn to face. And this book was like, it kind of really gave me, there's like an underlying philosophy under it, because it's clear what Voltaire's trying to get across when he wrote it. And that philosophy I don't want to spoil it for you, but the philosophy he had, I started to implement in my own life, and I see it differently now. But it's very good. The whole theme of the book, the whole commentary that he was trying to portray was that he's like almost targeting the overly optimist. And he's kind of saying like, life's not all sunshine and rainbows, and how you're going to get over it. But the reason why it's interesting to me was because the main character, it's almost like comedic. It's almost like satirical. Like imagine that whole serious thing I just said, the summary, but Mickey Mouse or Daffy Duck or Donald Duck is the main character. That's kind of what it was to me. Like, it was like funny. It was like he was doing this serious, like there's a serious theme here, but the main character is like, it's like comedic. I don't know, it's weird, but you'll really enjoy it. I loved it. Next book, Passion According to GH by Clarice Lispector. So when it comes to technicality and literature itself, this is probably the hardest book I have on the list. So when it comes to literature itself and technicality, this might be the hardest book I have on here. But I don't know. I feel like it's not hard. People just kind of see it as like, it's just a word choice. Like, she uses a lot of words I had to look up myself, and a lot of people would probably be remiss by that and try and look somewhere else. But if you get over the word choice and the gap of like, she has a higher vocabulary than what you probably have currently, nothing else is really harder for you when it comes to like how it's structured, the length of sentences. Nothing like that is hard. But I still like to say, definitely recommend this book. Probably one of my favorite books of all time. Basically, the gist of the book is that a lady sees a cockroach and she kills it, and her seeing that sparked this whole whimsical journey of like what life really is. And the roach represented much more than a roach. It was like a living being, and she realized like, I'm a living being and so is that, but I saw it as less than me. And like, there's just so much stuff going on, and that happens probably like maybe page like 15 of the book, where you start seeing like, okay, she killed the roach, or the roach is dead now, but why is there 300 pages of book left? Like, what's gonna happen now? And it all takes place in the mind of like someone that's like trying to grapple with life. And like, there's a lot of philosophical concepts in here. It's very philosophical in nature. And one of the things that really stuck with me was this whole thing of a third leg, which is basically like the third leg was the life she was living before she had this existential crisis. And before, she was like creating a false reality in her head, saying like, she kind of like built a crutch in her mind. The third leg is the crutch she had on life. And she was trying to like ground herself somehow, because she knew she was finite and the world was infinite. And this crutch was the only thing that was keeping her on the ground. Because once she let go of it, she started like drifting off into this infinite kind of whimsical journey of where am I, who am I really? It was so fascinating. And the thing was, it's gonna sound crazy, nothing she said, if you read it out of context, makes any sense at all. And I said that to someone else, and basically what they told me was, because they're way more advanced than me, but what they told me was, when you read Lispector, when you read it, it's not about what the words she's saying, it's the emotion, the feeling you're getting from the words. Let me elaborate a little bit on that. Basically, what I got from that, and what I got from reading her, was that she's saying words on the paper, but she wants you to think about it. So when you read it, once you read maybe like 2-3 sentences, close the book, think about what she's saying, and try and come to some kind of conclusion in your mind, and then go back to the book. Because it's not like she's giving you something to think. She's not instilling something in your head. She's giving you something to think about that's very complex, very very broad in nature, but wants you to narrow it down in your head so you can come back to the book with your own thought process. Like, her writing style was very open for the reader. It's like she was asking questions without a question mark, if that makes sense. That's the best way I can explain it, but once you read it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Very good, definitely recommend that. Next book, oh my gosh, Diary of Anne Frank, absolute masterclass. There's a reason why it's so popular. Like, I read it relatively recently, and I see why everyone talks about it the way they do. It's like the peak of what a memoir or a journal or a diary should be, one that's going to be published. The crazy part is that she didn't want it. I don't think it was supposed to be published. We're not supposed to be able to read this, but like the fact that we can is just so powerful. Reading is reading's a time machine, I swear. And to me, I think the reason why I love this diary so much is because it shows the duality of what life. I think life's duality. I think there's always a part one, part two, there's always a 1, 2, there's always an A, B for everything. But the most glaring duality in this book to me is that there's the horrors of war. It's literally about a girl in the Holocaust hiding from the Nazis. So there's this like dark, brooding feeling over here. But there's this high-spirited, young, like beautiful, spirited girl over here that's trying to see the world as like a place with optimism still. There's light in everything. And it was so conflicting when I was reading it. Like I was like falling in love with how she was saying things, like trying this youthful, naive, kind of pure spirited girl that's like getting torn down by the world that she's in. And it's like, on the other hand, there's this unforgiving war going on that doesn't care at all about her. It doesn't matter how young or pure she is. Like, oh, it was just so good. Just please read it. This might be like the highest of highs when it comes to recommendations from me. Next book, Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison. Now, this is probably the best written book that I have on here. But to me, it's not really hard. I'm pretty sure this is also a high school book for some people. But we follow a girl named Pecola. And Pecola wants blue eyes. But it's much more than blue eyes because it's a metaphor for whiteness. But to me, it's even more than that. I don't think it was whiteness. I think she wanted to be seen as pretty in her society. And just that chain right there of like how deep you can get into a book, that's why I love reading so much. Because on surface level, she wants blue eyes. But then you realize that she wants whiteness because only white girls with blue eyes is seen pretty. But then it's like, but maybe it's not the whiteness. Maybe she wants to be seen as pretty in her society. Like, there's just so much going on. But all I have to say is, she would look around in her society and see Shirley Temple with blue eyes. She would see the Sunbeam Bread with blue eyes. All the dolls in her house had blue eyes, blonde hair. Like, that's all she saw, and that's all that she would see as pretty. So when she saw herself in the mirror and she didn't see that, she started seeing herself as inferior or less than. But the reason why the book's so cool to me is because it follows people outside of Pecola that are still tied to her, that are going through the same thing. And there's like Charlie, there's Pam, like there's so much going on in this entire book, and they're all dealing with this theme of needing something they can't get. Like they'll never be white, and it's either they had to choose to love themselves or stick in this constant cycle of never getting something that they want. Absolute masterclass and commentary of identity, who you truly are, and the concept of needing something you'll never get. There's just so much going on. And written-wise, probably the best book I've read. Toni Morrison's probably the best writer I've read technicality. It's her or Kafka in my opinion. I would say Clarice Lispector, but she's just very, it's like I said, like she's not even, I don't think she's writing for anything with the words. It's just a feeling. But all that to say, please read The Bluest Eye. Next book, The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. So this is, I would say it's not self-help or philosophy. It's just much more of like a, basically the entire book is it's a book on strategy, and it's also Eastern. Like I was saying, Eastern literature is superior. But Musashi was a samurai. He was a martial artist, and he was like one of the greatest samurais of all time. And he wrote a book on fighting, on swords, on swordplay, on how to approach the enemy, like stuff. It's almost like The Art of War by Sun Tzu, but it's written so poetically to the point where you'll be able to take something from the book and apply it to real life. Like a small excerpt is something. It'll be like brace for impact, or it'll be like unsheath your sword, sheath your sword. Like, but you would read it and think it's just talking about swords, but when you see it in context, it's definitely talking about something way grander. And something that always stuck with me from this book that maybe it may entice you to read it is it's philosophy of the spirit of the thing itself. And basically what that is Musashi was saying, the more you give to something, it kind of like personifies the concept of whatever you're going after, and it'll reward you for going after it. So let's like say basketball, for example. It's saying basketball itself as a concept is a human, it's a spirit. It gives it like almost like human-like qualities. It personifies it. And it's saying the more you practice basketball, the more you watch basketball, the more you give to basketball, basketball itself will reward you. It's the spirit of the thing itself. Very interesting stuff. I really enjoyed like reading. Like, I just love East, like Shintoism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, like all that stuff is just, I don't really believe in anything that has to do with the religion aspect, but their texts are so interesting to me. I have a tattoo of this as well. I have a lot of tattoos, unfortunately, but I have a tattoo of this as well. Really, really enjoyed this. You'll definitely enjoy it too. Next book, The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood. So I read this early on in my reading journey, and it's a dystopian book, and basically we follow Offred, and she's in Gilead, Republic of Gilead. And basically in this society, women are only used for their bodies and are only used for sex and having kids. That's the only time we see women at all. And another thing people overlook in this book is that even the men are in some sort of like oppressive state as well, where like no one is really over this kind of line, but we follow the women in this book. And the first thing I got from this book is that this is a very real thing, and there's like Handmaid's Tale-esque, Gilead-esque things going on today, right now. That's why I love dystopians, because it's very, very real. Best dystopians are the ones that are almost like prophetical in nature, the ones that are like literally predicting something that could very easily happen. Like Parable of the Sower, 1984, Handmaid's Tale, these are all very real things that could really happen. But something I really liked about this book, that was something I haven't really heard people talk about, is that the main character, you would assume that it's in a dystopian where she's a woman and women are being oppressed in this society. You would think the book's going to be about the main character rebelling herself, but it's not. There's someone in the book that does rebel, but the main character itself is showing like this form of cognitive dissonance of she is like literally beat down by the society. And in the beginning of the book, she's not fighting for anything. And then she meets this person, well, she doesn't meet her, she's always been there, but Moira kind of convinces her or like shows her the outlook of like, you're literally oppressed. And then they start to like really get into it later on. But I just really enjoyed that conflict of the mind kind of feeling, because you're reading it expecting her to be this revolutionary, to be this Maya Angelou, Nina Simone, Angela Davis figure, and she's not until like later on in the book. But it's really good, very prominent today. Definitely read this. Read all the dystopians first, because like I think they're probably the most applicable to today, because it's literally happening. Look outside, and there's definitely some stuff going on in this book that is not to the fullest extent of the book. Obviously, they would not. I don't think it would ever get that far, but it's very real. Please read this and read it with a very open mind. The next book is two short stories from Kafka. It's Metamorphosis and In the Penal Colony. So Metamorphosis, obviously his magnum opus. Basically, it's about a man named Gregor Samsa that wakes up as a bug, and it shows how the people in society literally alienate him because he's not seen as human anymore. And that's just one interpretation. There's way more going on in that book. But the reason why I love that short story so much is simply because when he woke up as a bug, it was like that wasn't his biggest problem. He was literally saying like he when he woke up, he was literally saying like, man, people are gonna see me different now, or I'll probably be late to work today. Like talking about stuff that didn't matter. Like you're literally a bug now. Absolute masterclass, probably the greatest short story of all time. I mean, I've heard that a lot. And it's kind of like The Raven, whenever it's like, there's like 5 ways you can interpret it, and it'll be valid either way because you can prove all of them in the text. It's an absolute masterclass. Kafka's to me is like, it's Kafka, Poe, and Sylvia are probably my favorite writers of all time. Kafka, it probably leans towards Kafka 4 out of 7 days of the week. He's just so good. And his like, I haven't even read his full-length novels yet. I know America and Castle and In the Trial, obviously. I think I've started The Trial. But I think his prose and the way he writes is very punchy, very bleak, and it's built for short stories. All the in Metamorphosis was probably like maybe 40 sentences that were like less than 10 words. It's all very short stuff, very punchy, but he gets the point across so well. His prose is very suitable for a short story. And then the other short story was In the Penal Colony, which I could argue I think it's better than Metamorphosis, which I know is crazy. That I might get some backlash for that. But basically it's about there's this machine that will it executes people based on the punishment they have. There's definitely some absurdist themes in it. So like essentially it's basically saying all absurdism is the conflict of interest between two parties. And that's a very prominent thing in a lot of Kafka's work, but definitely Penal Colony. You'll love both. If I'm confident about any of these, I'm saying Dorian Gray and Frank, Penal Colony, Metamorphosis, and maybe Book of Five Rings are like the most like, there's no way you read that and not think this is a peak, this is great stuff. You'll love it. Please read this. Next one, Ethan Frome, Edith Wharton. So this is going to be the only book I have on here with this kind of preface. But when I first wanted to get into this book, people were telling me don't read any spoilers, don't try and read the summary, just go into it blind. And I see why they say that, so I'm not going to tell you anything about the book too much. All I will say is that it follows forbidden love, forbidden emotions. It's like a tragedy kind of style, has some despair, like stuff like that, themes like that. Like basically Ethan falls in love with Zini's cousin. Zini's like his love interest initially. He falls in love with the cousin. And he like falls in love with this this idea of like happiness that she could provide that Zini's not. Like there's just so much going on. And I'm usually like not one for romance like stuff. I don't like romance books per se. I don't really like romance movies too much either. To me it's just like romance is a thing that's supposed to be between two people and it's so distinct from everybody else, like person to person, that you can't make art about it and expect me to relate to it, unfortunately. I know I'm in the minority with that, but I mean, that's just how I see it. But this, I really enjoyed Ethan Frome, so you'll definitely enjoy this book. Please read it. Next book is The Divine Comedy by Dante, which is, yes, where I got the name from. But I also have this book here. It's called Poet of the Secular World. It's by Eric Arbeck. I don't know how to say his name, unfortunately. But I only have this in here because this is how I started learning about Dante. But I would just say before you read the comedy, reading a little bit more about Dante himself, because he's a very interesting character. And the reason why I did it was because, once again, I'm a devout Christian. So whenever I heard of the idea of the comedy, I always thought like he was trying to make fun of the religion. But when I started diving into who Dante was, he was a Catholic, and I feel like the art he made out of the comedy was just, it's satirical in nature, very clearly. Like when he's in hell, people he didn't like in real life were in hell. People that he really wanted to look up to, like, praised him in the book. Like, it's very clear what he was trying to do. But I see it much more as an art piece. And unfortunately, I'm one of those that believe separating art versus artists. So, like, I know it's unpopular as well, but that's just how I see things. I think art is transcendental. I think it's above the being. And I feel like the art you make lasts way more than you and is much bigger than you. So when you create something, there's definitely a vast distinction of a withdrawal between you and what you create. Whether you believe that there should be a link there, because obviously what you create comes from you. But to me, it's just two independent things, and that's just how I see art itself. All I can say though, probably one of the most known plots of all time. You definitely know what the book's about, but it follows Dante. He goes through hell, purgatory, and heaven, and he's guided by a man named Virgil. And it's so interesting how he depicts these places. Like, it was so cool to me. Inferno is like the most known. It's the first one, obviously, but I'm much more a fan of Purgatorio. I think it goes Purgatorio, Inferno, Paradiso. And I really enjoyed how he depicted Purgatory, because Purgatory is not a thing in the Bible. So this is all his mind creating things. Like in the Bible, it talks about Abraham's bosom. It talks about how we're all judged at the same time. So people are somewhere. Like everyone that's died before the judgment day, they are somewhere. And you could say it's Purgatory, but no one really knows, because it's not said in scripture where they really are. But at least from my knowledge, that's where I'm at with it. And it was just cool to see a depiction of something that was not really tangible. And it's also a poem as well. There's like a theme, there's a BPM to it when I was reading it. Like I knew how he wanted me to read it. Dante was very talented with how he was writing. I also read Vita Nuovo by him, and that's another great read. I wouldn't recommend it though. That's why it's not really in here, but it's also in this book. So if you want to get a book that has Vita Nuovo and a comedy, get Portable Dante, the Penguin version. Definitely pick up a biography of him, or just read up on Dante a little bit, and then read the comedy. And then after you read it, watch the Wendigo video on the comedy. I want to make a video on the comedy myself, but it just won't be as good as his. So I might just link his and watch his. Next book out here is Nostrum Underground, Dostoevsky. This is another one of the little bit slightly harder reads than the majority of the books in here. But I absolutely love this. Probably one of my favorite books of all time. It was my first Dostoevsky. I've read Crime and Punishment at this point. But when I read this, it was like so new to me how he was writing with such depth of the human emotions in novel form. I've seen people do it before. Like I've seen, like in philosophical works, people talk about human emotions very well, very in depth, because they study it. But like Dostoevsky's just a writer, and it was just cool to me seeing someone that wasn't studying it for his whole life really drilling into something that's like an infinite emotion, infinite concept. I believe humans are finite beings that can't understand anything. So whenever I see someone really trying to chisel away at something that's very hard to understand, it's like, yo, I applaud you. All that to say though, if Nostrum Underground is basically about a man that secludes himself because his intellect prevents him from action at all. But what's cool about this book is that it's paradoxical in nature, because the man says that his whole thing about life, what he hates the most, is intentional inaction. So people knowing they should do something and then don't do it. But that's what he does literally every day. So it was cool to see someone that was like having ultimate cognitive dissonance in the mind, saying like, I should be doing something, but then his mind, him being so smart, his intellect prevents him from doing anything, because he realizes nothing matters. Why am I doing anything? I have not seen a better take on isolation in this outside of Taxi Driver, the movie by Scorsese. And like Metamorphosis and Frankenstein are both alienation. People are alienating them. But in this book, it's self-isolation, meaning he decided to be like, I'm going to go somewhere else and do this. Like, I don't want to be a part of society. And the only thing that ties them together would be they're both alone. The underground man is alone, and so is the monster in Frankenstein. But one's alone because he cannot go back to society, and one can but chooses not to. It's so cool to read stuff like that. The contrast is so very real. Taxi Driver is my favorite movie of all time, so I understand why I like Nostrum Underground so much, but Highly, highly recommend. The Stranger, Albert Camus, and The Fall by Albert Camus. So outside of his major works, these are the only two that are in novel form. The Rebel is an essay, and so is Mr. Sisyphus. But Stranger and Fall are both philosophical texts, philosophical works, kind of, in novel form. It's really cool to read. So Stranger is his first novel, his first attempt at conceptualizing his philosophy somehow, and it's called absurdism. But basically what absurdism is the conflict of interest between the human mind and the world, and the human mind wants meaning, and the world doesn't have any. So the absurd lies in the contradiction of them trying to seek itself. The world has this inherent drive to pull us to it, and the mind wants to find meaning in a world that's pulling itself to it. And the absurd lies in the struggle between the mind trying to find something that the world doesn't have to give it. It's super interesting, and it's definitely highlighted more in Sisyphus, the essay that comes after The Stranger. But you'll definitely get that same vibe from The Stranger. And I don't want to spoil anything about the summary because there's like a big thing that happens in the book that kind of sets it off. But I feel like what I said enough about the philosophy is probably enough to get you to read it. If not, probably read a little bit of a synopsis somewhere. I just don't want to spoil it, be the guy that ruins it for you. But it's very good. And the last chapter of The Stranger is probably one of the best written chapters of all time, in my opinion, in literature in general. And The Fall is also really good. It's about a man that reflects on his life as a lawyer, as a Parsian lawyer, I'm pretty sure. And it's kind of like every triumph that he looked back on, it just revealed another failure. Like every time he would look back on his life, he would see things that he thought were highs, but they would be an underlying low. And it was just all this stuff going on in his life to where we just see a man that seemingly thought he made good decisions, make so many infinite bad ones. And it was ironic how he just thought, when he looked back, he thought he had this great life, but it predicted his downfall. It was so weird. That's why it's called The Fall. Please read both, trust me. But I do like Sisyphus the most out of all Camus stuff. Even though it's a harder read, I wouldn't put it in a video for beginners per se. It's my favorite work by him. So I'm going to add in a little bit for this video. Myth of Sisyphus is great. I've read The Rebel and The Plague. But those are the last books I had for the video. But like I promised, the greatest book of all time that everyone needs to read, the most recommended book that I have you ever get from me is the Bible. Yes, I know it's 66 books combined, but stick with me. This is the greatest book ever written. Ever written. Please read it. So I have read the New Testament. I read it last year. It took me probably 2 or 3 months to read the New Testament. I'm currently going through the Old Testament right now. And the Old Testament stories are some of the most compelling stories ever. There's so much symbolism, so much metaphors in them. There's just so much going on. I absolutely love it. Just in Genesis alone, you have let's just start kicking it off. You have the creation story, you have Adam and Eve, you have Cain and Abel, you have Abraham getting the covenant, you have Abraham and Sarah, you have Sarah and the kid talking to God, her doubting God basically. You have Jacob wrestling with God. You have Jacob and Esau deceiving Isaac. Oh yes, I skipped Tower of Babel. You have Tower of Babel. You have Abraham, the 3 visitors coming to Abraham. We're introduced to Enoch, who didn't ever die. God, he was so righteous that God lifted him up. He never had an actual death. We have Melchizedek, who is literally people think is a pre-incarnate Jesus. You really have the angel of the Lord, who is also, I think that is Jesus. The oldest person in the Bible is Methuselah, who's also mentioned in Genesis. Everything I just mentioned is all in one book of the Bible. I didn't even mention, bro, Joseph got sold into slavery. Joseph and his brothers, that's all in Genesis. And obviously I'm Christian, so whenever I read it for this spiritual value and literary value, much more spiritual. That's my God that's talking about. The Father is my God. So seeing people with so much reverence for Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, seeing people have so much reverence for the God that I believe in is just so inspiring and gives me so much faith in the God that I believe in. I think that's what the Old Testament is for, because everything in the Old Testament, the mysteries and the magic about it, is revealed in the New Testament through Jesus coming back. That's basically all the Old Testament is for. But reading is just so powerful to me, and I'm absolutely loving it right now. Please read the Bible, even if you're not Christian. Now, I do not recommend just reading it literature-wise, because I'm Christian, and my whole point of being on earth is to spread the gospel and make disciples of all the nations. So what I'm going to say is, if you're going to read it, please invite the Holy Spirit in and really read it for what it is. And while we're on it, spreading the gospel, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. He is the God of all, and every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess He is Lord. Jesus took the full wrath of God on the cross for you. He died for your sins. Yes, person watching, yes, you. The cornerstone of the faith is John 3:16. Is for God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, so that whoever believes in Him shall never perish but have everlasting life. Nothing we do ourselves as humans due to our finite nature and fallen nature because of Adam and Eve will never get us to heaven. We needed a Savior. That's why God sent Him. And if you believe in him and you believe that that's what he did for you, you will have everlasting life. Thank you for watching this video. Sincerely, hopefully you can get 1 or 2 recommendations from this video and you add it to your TBR, or you continue reading any of this stuff. And if you have any recommendations that I didn't mention in this video, please put them in the comments. Now I gotta figure out how to put all these stuff back on my shelf. But love you guys for watching this video, sincerely. Please read something today.